In today's video, we're looking at stories of elderly people eaten alive by animals, from a Montana campsite where a bear strikes without warning to a Georgia road where stray dogs close in fast. But first, near Rose Island in the Bahamas, a grandmother's snorkeling trip ends beneath calm blue water. It was September 6th, 2018, off the Bahamian coast where turquoise water stretched unbroken to the horizon. The morning was calm and clear. A tour boat paused above a shallow reef, ready for a short snorkeling stop. Linda Greer was 68, a retired nurse from Pennsylvania traveling with her daughter and grandchildren. She had worked most of her life in hospitals and small clinics, known for staying calm under pressure. After her husband died, her daughter convinced her to join this cruise as a way to start fresh. Linda was not an experienced swimmer, but she wanted to try new things. She had promised her grandkids she would snorkel with them, even if she stayed near the boat. Before boarding the smaller boat, Linda checked her yellow vest and snorkel straps multiple times. She asked the guide if the water stayed shallow near the reef. The guide told her it was calm and safe. What no one knew was that a private dive group had done a shark feeding session less than a mile away earlier that morning. The practice was illegal under updated local rules. The scent of chum and fish oil had drifted slowly on the current. The reef stretched below with coral ridges and sand. Schools of fish moved under beams of sunlight, and shadows from the boat drifted over the seabed. The group spread out, around 10 swimmers, mostly families. Linda stayed near the back, floating upright and adjusting her mask, keeping her daughter in sight. The current moved lightly eastward, pulling the group farther than planned. Bull sharks tolerate both salt and brackish water and often move through shallows near shorelines. They are thick-bodied and aggressive when feeding, with a bite force over 1,300 pounds per square inch. In clear water, they rarely attack humans unless triggered by scent or sudden movement, but in water recently disturbed by bait, a flash of color or vibration can cause them to strike. The first sign went unnoticed. A guide on the boat saw a dark shape moving near the swimmers, but thought it was a barracuda. Moments later, Linda drifted several feet away while clearing her snorkel. Witnesses said the water around her looked calm. Then a sudden surge broke the surface. A large shark lunged upward from below, striking and clamping onto her thigh. The force lifted her slightly before dragging her sideways under the water. Her daughter and another swimmer saw her arm reach up once before she disappeared in bubbles. The guide blew his whistle and shouted for everyone to return to the boat. Several passengers heard one short scream before the sound stopped under the splashing. The water stayed cloudy with silt and foam for several seconds, then went still again. The guide dove in with fins and reached the spot within 30 seconds. He saw a faint shape moving toward deeper water, a bull shark about 8 feet long. Linda surfaced briefly, face down, before the guide grabbed her vest strap and pulled her toward the boat. Blood spread fast across the surface, turning the water pink as crew members helped lift her aboard. The bite had severed an artery. They applied pressure and wrapped the wound with towels, but she lost consciousness before they reached shore. They radioed for emergency help, and another boat nearby joined them. Paramedics met them at the dock 10 minutes later. She was declared dead shortly after arrival. The medical report listed massive blood loss from a single traumatic bite as the cause. Authorities later confirmed a bull shark had been in the area, likely drawn by leftover chum from the earlier illegal dive. Witness statements from passengers and tour staff matched. The conditions were calm. There was no provocation. It was a single animal, and the event was fast. No one else in the group was injured. Investigators later confirmed the location and timing using witness statements and GPS data from the tour boat. That afternoon, the site was closed. Dive operators were questioned about unauthorized feeding. No operator admitted responsibility, but officials traced leftover bait crates to an unlicensed local charter. The government temporarily stopped all snorkeling trips near Rose Island for safety reviews. The cruise company released a statement expressing condolences and confirming the trip was run independently. The family stayed on shore to handle arrangements while other passengers reboarded quietly. Her belongings, a folded towel, mask, and sandals, were sealed in a clear bag and given to her daughter. Shark experts mentioned the rising issue of bait conditioning, where sharks connect the sound of boats with food. By evening, marine patrols recorded normal shark behavior in the area. The next morning, the reef looked as quiet as before, with only a temporary buoy marking the closed zone. The final report said the attack involved a single bull shark, showing normal feeding reflexes triggered by environmental environmental factors. There was no evidence of multiple animals or extended aggression. The ocean hides its danger beneath calm water, but on land, even the quietest forest can turn. Our next story takes us to Montana, where experience meets instinct in the dark. It was October 11th, 2014, in a remote forest region of southwestern Montana. The night was cold and quiet. The sky above the trees was clear with stars, and the river below moved softly over frozen rocks. A single tent stood near a dead fire, alone in the forest. Daniel Reeves was 71, a retired forest ranger who had spent half his life patrolling this same area. He knew every trail, water source, and ridge by memory. This trip was not a risk to him, but a kind of homecoming, a week of quiet time in the woods where he once worked. He had planned it as a break after a difficult year of health checkups and feeling his age more than usual. His daughter asked him not to camp alone, but he told her he would be fine. He carried bear spray, a weather radio, and years of experience. Daniel trusted his routine. He set up camp near a bend of a forest river, just off an old ranger access road. The site was flat and surrounded by spruce and cottonwood. He cooked simple meals on a propane stove and kept his cooler beside the tent, covered with a tarp. He had spent enough nights in the wild to think a small cooler would not attract attention, especially this late in the season when bears were less active. He noticed a few claw marks on a tree down the trail, but assumed they were old. The forest was shifting into early autumn. Frost covered the grass, leaves were brittle underfoot, and a low breeze carried the smell of pine and wood smoke. The nearby river created a steady hum that masked most other sounds. Campers from a site about half a mile away had packed up earlier that afternoon. By nightfall, Daniel was alone. Black bears are smaller and less aggressive than grizzlies, but far more common in Montana. Most incidents with humans happen when bears are surprised at close range or guarding food. Despite their name, their color varies from black to brown. In autumn, they spend most waking hours feeding or searching for food to prepare for hibernation. Their senses are especially sharp to food odors during this time. That evening, the temperature dropped below freezing. Daniel ate soup from a pot and left the pot cooling near the fire pit. He zipped his sleeping bag high and fell asleep around 10, lulled by the soft sound of the river. Around 2 in the morning, a dull scraping sound woke him. It sounded like metal sliding against gravel. Thinking raccoons had found his cooler, he grabbed a flashlight and unzipped the tent flap halfway. The night was silent, except for a faint rustle beyond the fire ring. He stepped out barefoot in his socks, light cutting across the clearing. The beam caught movement beside the cooler, a dark, broad shape with its head down and paws shifting. The animal lifted its head, eyes reflecting pale yellow. It was a black bear, larger than Daniel expected, its fur patchy from shedding. For a moment, both stood frozen, the bear's ears lowered. Then it lunged. Daniel stumbled backward, his heel catching the edge of the tent line. He fell near the fire pit, and the flashlight dropped into the dirt. The bear was on him in seconds, striking with one paw before biting across his shoulder and arm. He tried to roll away, but the weight pinned him down. His bear spray was still inside the tent. The sound of the attack, snapping twigs, heavy breaths, and brief groans carried through the trees. A camper at a distant site later told rangers they heard what sounded like shouting and a low growl before silence. After less than a minute, the bear stopped. It backed away, panting, and returned to the cooler. It tore the lid open and scattered food before disappearing into the trees. Daniel lay near the fire pit, motionless. His flashlight beam, half buried in soil, pointed toward the overturned cooler and a trail of footprints leading toward the riverbank. The temperature continued to drop. At first light, 2 hikers found the campsite while following the trail. They saw the torn tent and stopped short when they noticed the shape near the ashes of the fire pit. Daniel's jacket was shredded at the shoulder, and blood had soaked into the dirt. The cooler lay 10 feet away, with its lid broken off and food wrappers spread through the brush. His bear spray and a whistle were still inside the tent, unused. Rangers arrived shortly after sunrise. They identified tracks from a single adult black bear, likely male, based on the stride and size. The bear had approached from downwind, drawn by the cooler and cooking pot left out overnight. Rangers followed prints toward the river, but lost them near rocky ground. No bear was found during patrol sweeps that week. Investigators later reconstructed the events from tracks, blood patterns, and noise reports from a nearby campsite. The medical report listed multiple bite and claw injuries consistent patient with a defensive bear reaction triggered by surprise at close range. The time of death was estimated around 2:30 in the morning. His daughter later confirmed that Daniel had camped alone despite her concerns and had mentioned in a text the night before that he heard coyotes nearby. Authorities closed the surrounding area for 3 days while setting warning signs and bear-resistant food lockers. When the campsite reopened, rangers held a briefing for visitors about odor control, distance, and making noise during night movement. From the frozen stillness of Montana to the heat of southern India, danger takes a different form. Inside a rescue park, one unlocked gate becomes the line between order and chaos. It was March 17, 2015, at a wildlife rescue and breeding park on the outskirts of Bengaluru, India. In the back compound, keepers moved between feed rooms and hose racks, testing gates before crews went in to clean. The tiger block was quiet, except for the hum of a pump and the click of metal. Staff checked locks in sequence. The morning routine was standard. Meera Rao was 66, a retired schoolteacher who volunteered twice a week. She was careful and always early, logging tasks in a small notebook. She did not handle animals. Her role was washing floors, swapping water pans, and passing tools to the keeper on duty. After 30 years in classrooms, she liked the order of the routine. She returned often for personal reasons. Her husband, who had died the year before, loved the park. Volunteering kept part of that life for her. Staff trusted her because she followed instructions and never rushed. She knew the posted rule by heart. Nobody enters a big cat enclosure unless the cat is secured behind 2 locked barriers, and the locks are verified by 2 people. The tiger area sat behind a double door called a sally port, each exhibit pen connected to a holding pen by a guillotine-style slide gate. Standard steps were simple. Shift the animal into holding, drop the gate, engage the safety latch, and apply a secondary lock. A new junior attendant joined the morning rotation. He had shadowed the crew for 3 days and was eager but unsure of himself. Bengal tigers are ambush predators, averaging about 8 to 10 feet and often over 400 pounds for adult males. They can cover 20 feet in a bound and can knock a person off balance. In captivity, most serious injuries occur when a barrier is left open or a person is inside the same space by mistake. A short rush and a bite high on the body can be fatal. At 8:05 in the morning, the senior keeper called the shift, moved the male from exhibit pen B into holding 2, then clean pen B. The junior pulled the lever and said the cat had shifted. The senior looked through the viewing slot, saw stripes in holding 2, lowered the gate, and turned to brief the volunteer crew. The safety latch that should have locked the handle remained in the up position. No secondary lock was on. Meera staged the cart and waited at the sally port. Seeing the clipboard tap and wave forward, she stepped into pen B with a push broom and scraper. The concrete was damp. A floor drain gurgled at the back wall. She worked along the perimeter, eyes down, assuming the animal was secured. 2 small failures aligned. The tiger, restless from the pump noise, pressed at the seam of the slide gate. With the latch up and no secondary lock, the handle had enough play to rise. The gate lifted a few inches. The cat's paw slipped under the lip, claws finding the lower rail. With one shove, the gate rose. The rest took seconds. The tiger came through low and fast. Metal scraped once. Meera looked up and took 1 step toward the sally port, but the animal was already between her and the exit. The first impact struck her hip and knocked her sideways. She fell hard. The tiger pinned her with its forelimbs and bit high on her shoulder and neck. A keeper outside heard the clang, saw orange through the mesh, and hit the alarm. The alarm cut the pump and sent a code that locked adjacent doors. Protocol forbade anyone from rushing in. The senior keeper blasted an air horn through the mesh. The tiger paused, then tightened its hold and dragged Meera toward the back wall, away from the door. The distance was under 15 feet. A chemical immobilizer kit was stored in the service room 40 yards away. The vet tech ran for it while the senior kept the horn sounding. The tiger's posture stayed low and possessive, not frenzied. It held, released, and held again. Blood spread across the floor and ran into the drain. At 8:10, the veterinarian arrived with a dart rifle. A clear line of fire was available through the mesh. The first dart struck the shoulder muscle. The animal backed a step, then returned to its hold. A second dart went in 30 seconds later. Within 2 minutes, the tiger's head lowered and its weight shifted off Meera. Keepers used poles and shields while 2 others pulled her out by her belt and underarms. She had no pulse. A pressure bandage went on the neck wound and chest compressions began. City paramedics arrived within 15 minutes of the first alarm. They continued CPR but pronounced her dead at the gate. The time of death was 8:18 in the morning. Investigators later confirmed that the slide gate's safety latch had not been engaged and no secondary lock was in place. The checklist had been marked complete, but the handle showed no sign of a pull test. Scrape marks and a few orange hairs caught on the lower rail matched the tiger's movement through the gap. Radio logs and alarm timestamps established a clear 3-minute window from gate failure to tranquilization. The park suspended all big cat cleaning operations for 48 hours, while safety officers and forest department inspectors reviewed every latch and documented maintenance gaps. A brief report cited procedural non-compliance and recommended a double verification log before each entry. The facility installed new color-coded lockouts within the week and required all volunteers to retake enclosure access training. The tiger was moved to an isolation pen and kept under observation. The enclosure floor was disinfected and left empty for inspection. The following morning, keepers walked the corridor in silence, testing each latch twice before opening. The park's routine resumed, but every metallic click of a closing lock carried a new weight, a quiet reminder of how one missed step can decide everything that follows. Not every threat comes from behind a fence. Some wait in open water, silent and patient. Along Australia's river, a fisherman's small habit ends the way most habits do, quietly. It was May 28, 2016, on a river in Australia's Northern Territory. Late light lay flat on the water. A tin fishing boat drifted along the mangroves, its hull ticking on a submerged branch. The river looked routine. Harold Briggs was 73, a retired small engine mechanic who had fished this river since his 20s. He still knew the bends where barramundi staged and the sandbars at low water. He kept a leather logbook of tides and liked to be off before dark. One habit, warned about by rangers, was washing fillets over the gunnel instead of in a bucket. He was out with his closest partner from the angling club. They launched before sunrise, worked lures along eddies, and put 2 legal fish on ice. By late afternoon, they were downstream of a shallow bank where the mangroves thickened. Salt hung in the air, and mosquitoes started to rise. The river went glassy between light gusts. Harold decided to clean a single fish before they ran back. He set a board across the gunnel, lifted a barramundi from the cooler. His partner told him to use the bucket. Harold said it would take a minute. He leaned out and swished the first fillet through the water. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles. Big males can exceed 17 feet and 1,000 pounds. They sit low with only eyes and nostrils exposed and can launch forward faster than a person can react. Once they have a grip, they roll or drag prey under to drown. In tidal rivers with mangroves, they use roots and bank shadows as cover and wait for routine behavior. Rangers had posted signs about crocs following boats and taking fish at the surface. Locals warned about dusk, when the light flattens and the river hides movement. Harold had been told to keep his hands inside and never lean over muddy water. He bent the rule in small ways, convincing himself it was safe if he moved quickly and stayed near the shallows. As the sun dropped, he did what he always did: wash the meat, rinse the board, and put the gear away. The strike happened without a splash. A broad head surged from the brown water and closed on Harold's right forearm above the elbow. The pull yanked his upper body over the gunnel. His partner grabbed Harold's belt, but the boat tilted and the cooler slid, shifting weight to starboard. The crocodile heaved once and Harold went over. The partner swung an oar at the head and hit wood and water. The blade splintered. He tried again and lost footing. He fell to one knee and felt the hull bang a root. The surface boiled, then went flat. A thin stream of bubbles slid away under the mangroves. He started the outboard, circled the spot, and shouted Harold's name. A ribbon of blood thinned into the current and vanished under the roots. He marked the location on his GPS and idled to the nearest ramp to call for help. He reached a ranger by phone within minutes and relayed the coordinates. Police and wildlife officers launched boats before dark. They ran search patterns with spotlights along both banks and into side channels. Officers recovered the broken oar blade and Harold's hat. The tinny was towed for examination. Inside were a cutting board, knife, and a cooler. Through the night, crews worked the mangrove edge, probing with poles where roots formed pockets of still water. A helicopter passed overhead, but saw only the heat of birds and small mammals. Officers fired warning shots at 2 crocodiles that approached lights near the bank. Neither animal could be tied to the attack. At first light, the team found the tackle box floating against reeds half a mile downstream. A section of leader and a multi-tool were were inside, along with Harold's logbook in a plastic sleeve, the last entry listing tide times for the week. No clothing or human remains were recovered. Officers documented slide marks on the gunnel and a smear of blood on the outer hull where Harold had gone over. Wildlife officers interviewed the partner and two boaters who had idled past the bend around dusk. Their accounts matched on timing and location. The conclusion was straightforward. A large saltwater crocodile had taken Harold by the arm while he leaned over the gunnel and dragged him under within seconds. There was no sign of multiple animals or a struggle at the surface beyond the initial strike. The partner's hands were bruised where the belt had pulled through his grip. By late afternoon, the search shifted from rescue to recovery. The river darkened with the incoming tide, and visibility dropped. Crews set a temporary exclusion zone around the bend and posted hazard signs at nearby ramps, warning against cleaning fish at the waterline. A week later, the stretch was declared no fishing, while permanent signage and bank fencing were installed at high-use pull-ins. The partner cleaned the boat alone 2 days later. He washed the board and knife and returned the logbook to Harold's family. The tinny sat under a tarp for the rest of the dry season. On evenings when the river went still, anglers heard mullet flipping and the soft pop of air under the mangroves. People kept hands inside hulls and rinsed boards in buckets. Routine shifted by inches, which is how the river measures risk. Far from the mangroves and tide, another danger lives closer to home. In rural Georgia, 6 stray dogs turn an ordinary walk to the mailbox into something no one expected. It was February 3rd, 2015, in a rural county of northern Georgia. The morning was cool, the kind that made frost linger in the grass past sunrise. A small farmhouse sat off a dirt road lined with bare pecan trees. Beyond the porch, the gravel drive ran 50 yards to a rusted gate and a rural mailbox leaning slightly towards the ditch. The sound of distant barking had become common in that stretch of road, something neighbors noticed but had learned to ignore. Margaret Lewis was 79, a widow who had lived in the same house for more than 40 years. Her days followed a quiet pattern, feeding the cat, listening to morning radio, and walking to the mailbox once the mail truck passed. Her son visited twice a week to deliver groceries and check the generator. She refused to move into town, saying she liked hearing the wind through the pecans and the occasional sound of farm trucks on the highway. She still mowed parts of her yard herself, though her knees no longer let her move quickly. In the weeks before the attack, several residents had seen loose dogs roaming the area. Animal control had received multiple calls about the same group, 4 mixed-breed dogs, mostly hound and shepherd crosses, that had escaped a breeder's property a mile away. The owner had been cited for poor fencing before. Locals sometimes left out scraps, not realizing it encouraged the animals to linger. By late January, they had been seen near chicken coops and trash piles at the edge of driveways. The road where Margaret lived had no sidewalks or fences. Open fields stretched behind the houses, and the ditches stayed wet from winter rain. That morning, sunlight came through the trees in pale bands, and the frost had just melted off the mailbox. Margaret put on a sweater and rubber shoes, grabbed her small mailbag, and stepped outside. The only sound at first was the distant hum of a truck heading east. Stray dog packs are uncommon, but dangerous. When several underfed or unneutered animals band together, their behavior shifts from territorial to predatory. Mixed packs often include at least one dominant male that triggers group reactions. Once the pack begins chasing or surrounding, a human's movements, especially stumbling or waving, can trigger an attack response. Rural Georgia has reported several such cases, often involving dogs recently abandoned or escaped from unregulated breeding operations. Neighbors had heard barking the previous evening near a drainage culvert across from Margaret's driveway. Animal control had planned to send a truck that afternoon. The dogs had been scavenging along the ditch for days, sleeping under brush piles near a collapsed fence. As Margaret stepped off her porch, they were already watching from the tree line. She reached the gate, pushed it open, and started down the gravel path toward the road. She was 30 yards from the mailbox when 2 dogs moved onto the road, tails stiff, heads low. A third appeared behind her near the ditch. Then one more along the fence line. Margaret hesitated, swinging her mailbag in front of her. The barking built into a sharp, uneven rhythm, 4 voices echoing between the trees. She turned back toward the gate, but the dogs had closed the gap. The first contact came from behind. One of the smaller dogs lunged at her leg and caught her pant cuff. She tried to shake it off, swinging the mailbag. Gravel scattered under her shoes. Another dog clamped onto her sleeve, pulling her sideways. She fell backward into the ditch, the mailbag flying into the grass. The sound of barking grew louder, joined accompanied by short, heavy grunts. A delivery driver from the postal route rounded the curve moments later and saw movement near the ditch, a cluster of dogs shifting around something on the ground. He stopped the truck, hit the horn, and called 911. From his position, he could see flashes of a light sweater and movement under the pack. He shouted and threw a wrench from the cab window. The dogs broke momentarily, circling, then regrouped. The nearest house was 2 lots away. A neighbor heard the horn and the barking and stepped outside. He saw the dogs surrounding the ditch and grabbed a shovel before running toward the road. As he shouted, one of the larger dogs turned and advanced, then retreated when the horn sounded again. Sirens were audible within minutes, the sound of deputies arriving, to find 4 dogs still near the ditch, moving between the road and the grass. 1 fled toward the woods. 3 stayed close, snapping when approached, trying through the fields. 1 deputy fired twice, striking a dog that charged. The others were cornered with catch poles and restrained. The scene was silent, except for the hum of the idling postal truck. Paramedics reached Margaret within minutes of the area being secured, but she showed no signs of life. The attack had lasted less than 3 minutes from the first bark to the last movement. The driver who called it in later told investigators the sound stopped abruptly, as if everything had gone quiet at once. Animal control euthanized 1 dog at the scene. The remaining were captured and taken for testing. Investigators traced them to an unfenced breeding property several miles away. The county's final report cited containment failure and negligent supervision as contributing factors. Officials issued multiple citations and reminded residents not to leave food or scraps where roaming animals could gather. A week later, mail still arrived at the same box. Grass had grown over the ditch, and the marks in the gravel had faded with the rain. Only the red flag stayed upright, catching the wind on quiet mornings. Thanks for watching. Enjoy this video. Click more